He was an experienced explorer of a different kind, not of caves, but of fame. He had navigated the deepest, darkest tunnels of Hollywood, a world where the pressure can crush you and the air is thin. Etulhat edeshanitu. But this time he went too far. He had built a fortress of solitude, a quiet life far from the flashbulbs. But a new, ruthless breed of hunter had found his trail. They ignored every warning, written and unwritten, that guards a private life. And what happened next, on a quiet street, became one of the most shocking and misunderstood celebrity encounters in history. This isn't just a story of a star losing his cool. It's a story of obsession, a calculated trap, and a media firestorm that no one could have imagined. Steven Seagal, the man, had become a myth. He was a ghost from an era of explosive high-octane action, a name that carried the weight of 100 broken bones and a dozen blockbuster films. But the 90s were long gone. The man who had been a global icon was now a recluse. He lived a life of deliberate, monastic quiet. His home was a fortress, not just of steel and stone, but of privacy. He had explored the dizzying heights of fame and the crushing depths of public scrutiny, and he had chosen, it seemed, to simply disappear. He was no longer a movie star. He was a master of his own small universe, a man dedicated to his martial arts, his family, and the profound, impenetrable silence he had spent decades building. The world, with its noise and its judgment, was kept firmly on the other side of the gate. He was, by all accounts, a man who had retired from the battle, but the world's obsession had not retired from him. The media landscape had changed. It was no longer just about reporters. It was about hunters, and a quiet, reclusive legend was the ultimate prize. He was the explorer who had found a hidden cave, and the world was desperate to drag him back into the light. They weren't a gang in the traditional sense. They didn't carry weapons or wear colors. Their weapons were long-lens cameras and industry contacts, and their organization, a notorious tabloid agency called Bulter Media, was far more ruthless. They operated with the precision of a military unit and the morality of sharks. To them, a celebrity's life wasn't a life. It was a product. And Seagal was a product that hadn't been on the shelf for years. They saw his reclusion not as a choice, but as a challenge. For months, they had a team posted near his estate, a fruitless and expensive endeavor. Then they got the tip. It was the crack in the fortress. His daughter, Ayan, an intensely private woman who lived overseas, was flying in to visit. She was, in their cynical world, fresh bait. The plan was simple and cruel. Forza confrontation. Provoke the man known for his on-screen volatility and capture the gruesome end of his famous temper. They would create the monster they wanted to sell. The head of the agency, a man known only as the editor, gave the order. This wasn't journalism, it was a hunt. They were the explorers, and they were about to enter the tunnel, ignoring every sign that warned them to stay out. The air inside the fortress was tense. Seagal's small, professional security team advised against any public movement. "They're here," his head of security, a former Mossad agent, stated flatly. "4 cars. They know she's here. They're waiting for you to move." His wife, Elle, a woman who understood the fragile peace they had built, placed a hand on his arm. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't give them what they want. Let them wait. They'll get bored and leave." It was the warning, the plea from the one person who knew the man, not the myth. She knew the weight of his legacy. The pressure of the persona he had to carry every day. To be calm in the face of aggression was his code, but to be helpless in the face of a threat to his family was not. Ayan hadn't seen her father in nearly a year. He had promised her a quiet dinner at a small, private restaurant they had been going to since she was a child. To cancel, to hide, to let this gang dictate the terms of his life inside his own home. It was a line he would not let them cross. He ignored the warnings. He believed his security could handle it. He believed he could remain the calm center. He was the experienced explorer, believing he could navigate this one last dangerous passage. The restaurant was quiet, the dinner undisturbed. For 2 hours, they were just a father and a daughter. His security team had swept the location, and the back entrance was secure. But Vulture Media was an amateur. They had a tracker on the car. They didn't wait for him to leave the restaurant. They waited until his SUV turned onto a narrow, one-way residential street, a place with no escape. It was the narrow tunnel. 2 cars blocked the front, one a side street, and a fourth slammed in from behind. Before the driver could react, the gang was out, swarming the vehicle. This wasn't paparazzi. It was an assault. Flashbulbs strobed with blinding, epileptic intensity, turning the night into a disorienting, white-hot nightmare. They slammed their hands on the windows, their faces pressed against the glass, screaming. They weren't asking questions. They were shouting a name, not his, but his daughter's. Ayan. How does it feel to have a killer for a father? They were using old, debunked tabloid lies as a weapon. They weren't trying to get a photo. They were trying to get a reaction. They were trying to break him. Inside the car, Ayan was terrified, and Seagal, the father, watched the man he had tried to bury, the protector, begin to surface. The car door opened. The chaos peaked. The gang surged forward, believing this was it, the moment the animal would lash out. But the man who emerged wasn't an animal. He was a force of nature. Seagal didn't shout. He didn't raise his hands to fight. He simply ... moved. He was a wall of absolute, cold calm. He put himself between the swarm and his daughter's door. One photographer, a man named Marco, the most aggressive of the pack, lunged forward, trying to get a lens past Seagal's shoulder to capture Ayan's terrified face. What happened next would be debated for years. Marco went down, and he went down hard. Did Seagal touch? Or did he, in his rabid frenzy, simply trip over his own feet in the face of an immovable object? The cameras captured only the fall. They didn't capture a push. They didn't capture a strike. They just captured Seagal moving, a black hole of stillness in a universe of flashing lights. He guided Ayan from their car to the security vehicle that had pulled up, his body a complete shield. He never spoke a word. He never looked at the man on the ground. He got his daughter to safety, and he was gone. The gang was left standing in the street, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a giddy, triumphant shock. De hijas. Italiano. This was the gruesome end they had been banking on. Waiting and over, Vulture Media's edited package was sent to every major news outlet on the planet. The story wasn't father protects daughter from aggressive mob. The story was Steven Seagal violently attacks journalist. The narrative was set before Seagal's car was even back in his garage. The man on the ground, Marco, was now their star witness. He gave a tearful interview from a hospital bed, claiming Seagal had grabbed him by the throat and thrown him like a rag doll. It was a lie, but it was a compelling one. The media chaos exploded. This was the tragedy. The hook spoke of the public execution of a man's reputation. Overnight, Seagal was no longer a recluse. He was a pariah. Talk shows dissected his history of violence. Pundits debated his unstable nature, his entire legacy. Every action film, every interview was recontextualized as a prelude to this one inevitable, violent breakdown. The gang had won. They had pushed the explorer into the tunnel and engineered a coven. They had their story, their clicks, and their monster. And they were about to make millions. They had crossed him, and for the moment, it seemed like the best decision they had ever made. The emotional aftermath was immediate and suffocating. The fortress was now a prison. News vans lined the quiet residential street. Helicopters hovered day and night, their rhythmic chopping a constant, invasive heartbeat. The family was trapped. Aeon was consumed by a quiet, devastating guilt. She knew rationally that this was not her fault, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she had been the bait that led the hunters to her father. She had brought this storm to his door, shattering the peace he had worked so hard to build. The backstage conflict was just as intense. His public relations team was in a panic, begging him to issue an apology, to control the narrative. His lawyers, a separate and much colder group of people, gave him the opposite advice. Say nothing, do nothing. Wait. This silence was interpreted by the media as arrogance, as guilt. The pressure on his legacy was immense. Was this how he would be remembered? Not as the first American to run a dojo in Japan, not as an action legend, but as a violent bully who attacked a defenseless man on the street. The gang at Vulture Media had done more than get a story. They had put his entire life on trial. The fan reaction was a global civil war. A new generation, unfamiliar with his work and primed by a culture of cancellation, condemned him instantly. To them, he was the definition of toxic masculinity, a relic that deserved to be buried. But his old fans, the ones who grew up with his films, saw something else. They saw the gang for what it was, a cowardly mob. They saw a father protecting his child. What did they expect him to do? They wrote, let them attack his daughter. Online, the battle raged. Memes were created. Old interviews were resurfaced. But the dominant narrative, the one driven by Vulture Media, was winning. The gang was celebrating. Their website traffic had shattered all records. Marco, the victim, was on a paid media tour, his story getting more dramatic with each telling. The editor watched his ad revenue climb into the seven figures. This was the pinnacle of their careers. They had taken on one of the toughest, most reclusive men in the world and had brought him to his knees. They had crossed Steven Seagal, and it had made them rich. The regret, they were certain, was all his. They couldn't have been more wrong. The regret did not come as a punch. It came as a quiet, perfectly typed, 500-page document. Seagal's legal team, having gathered security footage from every building on that dark street, filed a billion-dollar lawsuit. It wasn't just for libel, it was for targeted harassment, stalking, conspiracy, an intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the lawsuit was just the beginning of the gang's regret. The true consequence was something they never anticipated. Their star witness, Marco, was now a public figure, and Seagal's legal team, in their first public statement, released the unedited audio from the ambush. The audio, clean and chillin', captured Marco and his team screaming, "How does it feel to have a killer for a father?" at Ayan. The narrative flipped instantly. The public, who had been debating a fight, now heard a calculated psychological assault on a young woman. And Seagal's fans, a massive, global, and fiercely loyal base, now had a new target. Marco, who had lied about being assaulted, was now experiencing a very real, terrifying digital assault. He received thousands of death threats. His address was leaked. He was the one who was now trapped, a prisoner in his own home. The story's twist wasn't in the fight. It was in the why. The lawsuit forced Vulture Media into discovery, and their internal communications were made public. The gang hadn't just gotten a tip. They had been actively stalking Ayan for weeks, waiting for her to be with her father. It was a long con, a premeditated trap, and in a leaked deposition, Seagal himself, under oath, finally spoke. The opposing lawyer asked, "Why did you engage Mr. Seagal? Why risk it all?" Seagal, the explorer who had seen it all, looked at the lawyer, his voice low and calm. "It was not a risk," he said. "It was a decision. They put my child in a tunnel and set a fire. I was the only one who could walk through it and get her out." The gang had, in fact, instantly regretted it. Vulture Media was bankrupted by the lawsuit. The editor lost everything, and Marco, facing perjury charges, publicly recanted his entire story, admitting he had tripped and had been pressured by his bosses to lie. The world thought they had watched an action star lose his temper, but what they had really witnessed was something far colder and far more calculated. A father, a master of his craft, deliberately walking into an ambush to end a threat, not with a punch, but with a strategy. The gruesome end wasn't his. It was terse.